The most famous off-road truck in Russia is the Ural. It is not surprising, because first under the designation Ural-375, and after modernization under the designation Ural-320, it has been on the conveyor of the Ural automobile plant for more than 60 years. This is a truly legendary truck, known and respected in many countries of the world. What is such an impressive longevity of the Ural truck? Let's try to figure it out. We will study the history of its creation and production, get acquainted with the strengths of the design and how it has been improved over the years. The prototype for the Ural 375 truck was the experimental model NOMI 20 with a 6x6 wheel formula. Abbreviation NMI. This is the abbreviated name of the Scientific Research Automobile and Motor Institute, which in the Soviet Union was engaged in research of various promising designs of automotive technology. An experimental off-road truck, which became the prototype for the Ural truck, was designed and built at the Scientific Automobile and Motor Institute in 1956 under the guidance of the famous Soviet scientist and engineer Nikolai Korotonishko. With a short metal body, it was called NOMI 20, and with a larger and more spacious wooden platform, NOMI 21. In May 1957, an experimental NOMI 21 truck was brought to the city of Mias, where the Ural automobile plant worked. The engineers of this plant significantly improved the truck provided to them in order to bring its design, firstly, to the requirements of mass production, secondly, to the requirements for reliability and resource, and thirdly, to the ever-growing requirements of the military customer, who was for this truck's chief. For 6 months of painstaking work by the efforts of the designers of the Ural automobile plant, instead of the front standard drive axle with final drive from the light off-road truck GOZ-63, the car received a completely new front axle, which was more load-bearing and unified in terms of gearboxes with rear axles. In the rear axles, the crankcase was reinforced and the connection of the hubs and axle shafts was made movable. The car got a completely different cabin, front fenders and hood. It received tire inflation and air filtration systems, a winch, shielded equipment and a sealing system for all nodes to overcome fords up to 1.8 meters deep. It is easy to see in the photographs that even the outwardly modified Ural differs significantly from its prototype built at the Scientific Automobile and Motor Institute. It turns out that the merit of this institute is the creation of the basic concept of the future Ural truck, but the creation of its final technical appearance is already an unconditional merit of the specialists of the Ural automobile plant. It is interesting that the Ural, which was still being designed, was originally planned to be put into serial production in Moscow, at the main plant of the Soviet Union at that time for the production of trucks, which was called ZIL. He then produced the already significantly outdated ZIL 157 off-road truck, and was preparing to release his successor under the designation ZIL 131. So, the management of the ZIL plant offered to give the ZIL 131 to the Ural automobile plant, and pick up the new Ural for themselves. But the leadership of the Ural automobile plant defended its right to organize serial production of the Ural. In many respects, this was possible because he was supported by the leadership of the army, which quite reasonably believed that the farther the plant was from the borders of the country, the better. When in 1961 the Ural 375 was tested and ready for mass production, the conveyor of the Ural automobile plant was busy producing an earlier model, a 4x2 truck with a smaller payload. Since there were a lot of orders for this truck, they were in no hurry to remove it from the main conveyor, and the Ural 375 mass production was launched on a temporary conveyor in another workshop. The Urals, which were made on a temporary assembly line, differed from subsequent cars in the folding fabric top of the cab. That is, instead of a metal roof, they had an awning like a convertible. In total, a little less than 8,000 of these trucks were manufactured. And when in 1964 the Urals began to be produced on the main assembly line of the plant, it received a completely metal cab, which was more convenient and comfortable for the driver. Why was the cabin first made with a cloth top, and then replaced with an all-metal one? It is generally accepted that the top of the cab was made of fabric to simplify the transportation of the truck in transport aircraft and helicopters. In fact, the main reason for the rejection of the all-steel cab was different. In the late 1950s, a conventional war threatened to turn into a nuclear war with huge atomic bomb explosions. Naturally, they tried to protect the technique from them. The simplest means was to hide it in a trench, and try to dig a hole that will fit a whole truck. Therefore, in order to dig to a shallower depth, they decided to lower the cabin due to the folding fabric top. But after the military tried to put the BM-21 Grad multiple launch rocket launcher on the Ural, after the fabric top was torn off at the first shot, the military themselves demanded that the convertible cab be replaced with a fully metal cab. The first combat use of multiple launch rocket launchers took place during the armed conflict between the Soviet Union and China in 1969, when these rocket launchers literally blew to pieces Chinese troops prepared to invade the territory of the Soviet Union within a few minutes. Interestingly, the prototypes of the Ural trucks were equipped with a panoramic windshield. But the Borsky glass factory, which was supposed to supply them for the Ural automobile plant, was heavily loaded with orders and did not have time to start serial production of the Urals. Therefore, the designers quickly made a variant of the cabin with a flat composite windshield. The military also advocated this option. Firstly, it is easier for them to supply cars with such glasses. Secondly, if during the course of a combat mission a half of such glass breaks in front of the driver, he can always easily replace it with the neighboring half. As a result, on all serial trucks Ural-375 and its subsequent modifications, without exception, a flat composite windshield is still used. The most interesting story related to the improvement of the Ural-375 design is associated with the appearance of a non-switchable all-wheel drive on all 6 wheels. At first, all Ural trucks were produced with a plug-in front axle, the drive of which the driver activated only when driving off-road. It was believed that when driving on quality roads, disconnecting the front axle from the transmission increased efficiency by reducing transmission losses. But soon the testers began to notice that in all-wheel drive mode, that is, when all 3 axles are connected to the transmission, the Ural consumes less fuel than in the mode when only 2 rear axles are connected. And at first no one could understand what was the matter. However, the designers of the plant left the theoretical questions to the scientists, and they themselves quickly redid the transmission, making the front axle of all produced Ural trucks permanently connected to the transmission, that is, not disconnected. And only 4 years later, the phenomenon was explained by scientists. It turns out that the dynamic rolling radius of a tire changes depending on the presence or absence of torque on the wheel. And the radius changes, the path that the wheel travels in the same time also changes. More radius, less path, and therefore fuel consumption is also less. In cars with their small wheels, this difference is not noticeable, but in trucks it is very noticeable. All drivers who ever drove the Ural-375 noted a very high fuel consumption. The so-called reference fuel consumption of the gasoline engine of this truck, indicated in the reference data, is 48 liters per 100 kilometers. But this is in ideal conditions, that is, on a flat road, with a perfectly adjusted engine and transmission at a speed of 40 kilometers per hour. In fact, in everyday use, the fuel consumption was enormous. For example, when driving on snow 60 centimeters thick, the Ural consumed about 100 liters of fuel per 100 kilometers. The situation changed for the better when, in 1977, Ural trucks began to be equipped with a modern KAMAZ 740 diesel engine at that time. Such trucks received the designation Ural 4320 and outwardly differed in long vertical slots on the radiator lining. With this diesel, the control fuel consumption of the truck has dropped to 31 liters per 100 kilometers. That is, it became 1.5 times smaller. And this is already at a speed of 60 kilometers per hour, that is, 1.5 times more. The gasoline-powered Ural-375 was the most voracious truck in mass production in the Soviet Union. And yet, with such an engine, it continued to be produced until 1991. But this is all in the past. Every year, the use of Ural trucks in civilian industries is expanding. In construction, in logging, in mining, in fire departments. This forces designers to constantly improve their design. So, in the past decade, Ural trucks received more load-lifting drive axles and a stronger frame, a more modern YMZ 536 diesel engine, a German ZF gearbox, a pneumatic brake system instead of an unreliable hydropneumatic one, pneumatic control of the transfer case and lockable rear axle differentials. and in 2015, on the basis of Ural trucks, a new model was developed and put into mass production, already made, taking into account the requirements and wishes, first of all, of civilian customers. This off-road truck, produced in 4x4 and 6x6 versions, was called Ural NEXT. I will talk about it in one of the next videos.